Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Today, talking to a man who I've been requested to have on the channel for some time and finally managed to get the diary to work. And we're going to be talking about a solution, a remedy for the farming situation that we can see, because obviously farmers are facing a lot of government influence, which is not good. So we need remedies for those, and also remedies for us as ordinary, everyday individual people in our own sovereignty and in money, the money that we spend, not that horrible debt currency that keeps us in trouble. So my guest today is Michael O'Benicia, who you may know from the film The Great British Mortgage Swindle in, I think, 2016. He is a filmmaker, of course, and a comedian, and he is the founder of the Universal Community Trust. And he joins me now. Michael, so lovely to have you on the channel.
Thanks very much for inviting me, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here.
You've been in the game, if I can call it a game, a long time, talking about these sort of things that we're going to talk about. It must have been quite a struggle in the early days as a comedian doing stand-up, talking about the things you wanted to. How were you originally, or how are you taken down to the sort of the lay public that might come to a comedy gig?
Well, in the very early days, I was lucky enough, fortunate enough to be graced with the experience of working with some of the best comics in the business in the early 90s when I started. I started as a comedian when I was 22, pretty much went straight onto the London circuit from a drama degree at Leicester Poly. And I was doing near the knuckle, politically incorrect stuff from the beginning. I was one of the few men who was doing jokes about sanitary towels, for instance, because there was a famous Simplicity advert at the time, and I was just ripping off this advert to get some laughs. But you've no idea how many people I ended up offending. So much so that when I got talent spotted, because I went on a run of gigs, because I was a young comic, it was easy to get attention, and because I went on a run of gigs where I stormed virtually, like it was 22 gigs I stormed in November 1991. And during that storming run, I played with all of the best comics on the circuit at all the best venues, and I got talent spotted for the Jonathan Ross Last Resort show at the time. He used to have comics on two or three times a week who were doing about 3.5 minutes. And I was asked to do 3.5 minutes of my near the knuckle stuff about sanitary towels and other stuff about advertising that was just as politically incorrect. And when I was waiting for a contract to come through, I got a phone call from the agent who had booked me, saying that because I was a new comic, didn't have an agent or a manager who was, part of the big time, as it were. I put a lot of noses out of joint because there was a pecking order, and I was removed from the last resort as a result. Now, at the time, I believed that that was exactly what happened. Now I don't. Now I know what happened, and because I've since had it confirmed. There were complaints about the fact that I was a man doing jokes about female hygiene products, even in
Wow.
1991. A
Right.
complaint that had me removed from a Channel 4 light entertainment show with Jonathan Ross, which you just wouldn't imagine would be the case, but it was. So I ended up leaving stand up because I was angry about the fact that it wasn't about how funny you were, basically. So
Mm.
I got into writing, and I ended up writing a couple of plays on the Fringe in London that did really well, and I was approached by a production company to develop one of them into a screenplay. I did that, and cut a long story short, I ended up at the Cannes Film Festival for the first time in 1994, pitching various projects, and that was my baptism of fire into the film industry. But again, to fill your audience in the shortest possible time, I ended up as a proper international film producer. I had a slate of 8 films, and some of them had A-list stars attached. One of those films that was a film about the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, called Bobby by Emilio Estevez, and I was credited at the time as the producer who dug that film out of 3 years of development hell. In other words, I got it with the people who got it made. I was in charge of the sales estimates, the sales projections, and the budget, and I predicted that it would make the exact amount of money that it made worldwide at the box office, $125 million. I also predicted that it would get nominated for three Oscars, and it did get nominated for three Oscars, but I got sacked by the writer director because I suggested that he needed to shave 20 minutes off the running time of the film. And as a result, I was stripped of the credit and £8.5 million of the net profits that I was due from the contract that was just ignored on the basis that the director's ego was put out of joint by me suggesting that he needed to shorten his screenplay. To cut a long story short, this got the attention of a lot of big cheeses in the film industry. They sent them to check me out, and they basically made me an offer. They said, look, Michael, we offer you guaranteed success on every film that you ever make or every project that you ever put out. They'll all get five-star reviews. People will love them. No one will ever attack you. But there's one condition, and that condition was they wanted me to keep my mouth shut about what I already knew about 9/11, which was why I was on a surveillance list with the Secret Services from very soon after 9/11 when I found out information that could have easily got me killed at the time, but no one would believe me, so the information wasn't being spread around. But
Yeah.
essentially, they tried to button my lip. They tried to silence me on what I knew about 9/11 because they knew I was on the brink of having a career which, was going to make me very famous. It was going to give me a very loud voice. But I turned down the offer to sell my soul. And as a result, I was blacklisted. So I had to go underground. And that's why I ended up making films like The Great British Mortgage Swindle. But it was also because this resulted in me becoming an activist because I saw how corrupt the system was. I knew that it wouldn't let me get the messages out that I needed to get out to, so that we could together build a better world for our children and grandchildren. And so instead, out of necessity, with my back to the wall, I I saw that there was a way that we could create a new world on this earth without attacking the old tyrannical one, which seeks to do us and does do us so much harm. If we oppose that with physical force, it will only crush us because that ultimately is one of the things it's trying to provoke the people into doing, to using violence against the state. And as Buckminster Fuller pointed out back in the 1970s, when you have a tyrannical system, the only way that system can be stopped or abated is for you to build concurrently a new advanced civilization that makes the old one obsolete. So this led to me coming up with the concept of universal community trust. And universal community trust is the first in living memory, at least, because nothing after all is new under the sun. But in living memory, this is the first time that a government-free jurisdiction has been created. And we created it by international treaty, by the letter and in the spirit of international law and the law of nations. We created 26 new independent micro-states that exist still to this day on these shores of Britain, and there are other places around the world that have done the same thing. So we've already created a concurrent jurisdiction called Universal Community Trust that exists on these shores and anywhere on this earth where free Indigenous peoples decide to stand under the protection of the Treaty of Universal Community Trust. Now, that is the introduction for your audience to understand what I'm going to say next. The only reason that the British farmers are currently under the cosh of the government is because of one technical problem that exists for all landowners in this country. And that is when the land is conveyed, i.e., let's just take an example. When a farmer bought the land that they're farming, if there are no, even if there are no financial encumbrances like mortgages or loans, or fake mortgages and loans, more like, obviously, but
Yeah.
if there are no financial encumbrances registered at the land registry, the the owner of the land is free to write whichever local authority he chooses in the box marked local authority on the land registry form, which is called an AP1 form. Now, the AP1 form is what your solicitor uses to change the what's written in the land registers. And there are two land registers, particularly. One is the registration of ownership, and the other is the registration of charges. And when you have no charges over your land, in the event that you're a farmer and you've just bought this land and you don't want to grant jurisdiction to the government to tell you what to do, to order you to cull your livestock on fraudulent arguments which simply don't hold water, you can fill in this one box on a form at the land registry, you can fill in your own name or your own trust or your own organization as the local authority instead of your local council. And there is absolutely nothing that anybody can do to stop you. This is called it's the ancient law of manorial estates. It means that if you own a piece of land, then you are the sole sovereign of that land. You are able to say what happens on it as long as what happens on it is lawful, and nobody can stop you unless you have signed away the sovereignty of your land to the local council by granting it jurisdiction. Now, we realize that this is a concept that is probably going to be alien to most people. There may be a few of you who've heard me talk about this on various webinars that I've run over the past few months and years, but I'll just run over it again. So what I'm talking
Mm.
about is the only reason that the local council claims to have the right to charge you council tax and to charge and to run a parking banditry business outside your property, on the road outside your property, the only reason they get away with doing such things is because your conveyancing solicitor, when you bought that property, filled in the local council's name in the box marked local authority. I'm suggesting that if every British farmer wrote their own name or the name of their own organization in that box instead of the local authority's name, local councils, then even though every farmer would become immediately responsible for all the maintenance that the council are supposed to do and don't do, i.e., maintain the roads around the property and any street lighting that's there, etc. Apart from that, there is no change, except the council have no jurisdiction to to argue that they have authority over the farmer to order the farmer to get the cows vaccinated or the sheep or whatever livestock they have to cull it on the basis of a false notion that there's some killer lurgy out there that is going to
Right.
wipe everybody out if they don't do the cull. What I'm saying is, in the event this UCT remedy is adopted by all British farmers, they take the jurisdiction of the government to act away from them. And the
Can
legal argument becomes very easy to win. Where is the jurisdiction to act? It doesn't exist. And because
right.
they demonstrate through the land registry that they have established jurisdiction elsewhere, the matter is settled and closed.
Can the farmers, and in fact, can anybody for that matter, go back to the land registry and say there's been an error and I want to correct it and change that box on there so that the jurisdiction is changed to your own jurisdiction?
That's a great question, Richard. Yes, absolutely. So let me just run over that for people. So in the event that farmers or anybody else who owns land in this country that's registered at the land registry for that matter, but let's focus on the farmers. So in the event the farmers have registered land, they can make an application called an AP1 application. And all you have to do is fill out the AP1 form. They're all downloadable easily on the net. And you fill out the form, or you get a conveyancing solicitor to fill out the form, but I wouldn't. It's very easy to fill out the form yourself. You just simply look up the directions on how to fill out the form on the land registry's website. It's the best way to do it. And it's relatively simplistic. So you fill out the form, and then you also make a witness statement yourself, which is just a plain and simple witness statement affirming the facts. And the facts are, well, whatever you need them to be. But in this particular case, the facts would be that you have the authority to change the register to read a different local authority to the one from before. And the land registry will immediately get in contact with you and say, you do realize this means you're liable for the maintenance costs on your property. And all you do is you affirm that you are well aware of that. And that's the only thing that we're aware of thus far that the land registry has to make you aware of. And once you are aware of that, that's it. The application, as long as there is nobody who objects to it, and if you haven't got a mortgagee on board, or a bank who's got a charge over the property, who's basically ordering you to do what they think you should do on the property and not what you want to do, unless you're in that situation, which takes a different type of remedy, then there's nobody who can stop you doing this.
That is fascinating. And I'm assuming that most people do not know that, and farmers maybe in particular who are being pressured by the government to follow a whole host of different agendas for large and nefarious reasons that we needn't go into too much detail here, except that they probably have no notion, and we've seen in other countries where they're protesting because they don't want to lose their land, or they don't want to be told how to farm or not to farm, as is the case being pushed on us all. So that is an amazing. I mean, that is such a simple and very easy to do remedy, and the land registry will just administer that. They're not going to push back other than just make you aware that you are liable. You mentioned outside the property and the road, so that also then becomes a bit like the old days in which, and the old turnpike road days, in which the lords of the manor used to have to make sure the roads passing their property were okay for travel and not blocked by falling trees or too many potholes and things, which some did and some didn't. I'm assuming that is the case. So some farms will have
Yes.
quite a bit of that to do, and some, of course, maybe just by the geography of the land, won't have quite so much. But that's
Yes.
pretty much it.
Yes, that's pretty much it. And you will maybe remember from during the course of your life when you've been driving through the countryside or walking through the countryside, and you will have heard that there's shooting going on some walled estate. That's because under the manorial estates laws, they've claimed jurisdiction over their own property and they're allowed to shoot on their own land. Because quite simply, you're unable to do that unless you have the jurisdiction to decide to do so yourself currently. And and I'm not suggesting that people should do this. I'm just saying that's an example of how this is used. And this is how people like Lord Armstrong have opted out all of their estates, and that they are well, and whether I'm not sure if they've been sold yet, but before the sale was launched, they were vast across Northern England and particularly Northumberland, and parts of Northumberland have very often opted out of statutes that Lord Armstrong opted his land out of under the old manorial estates laws. So they can't even deny that these laws don't exist. And even though you were saying that there is no technical reason why the land registry can raise any kind of objection, and there isn't, they will be very concerned if they see if
I
you're trying
bet they
to,
will.
yeah,
Yes, I bet they will.
yeah, because they'll see the potential revenue shortfall for the local councils. They'll see it immediately. So you have to be prepared for at least a little bit of resistance in that regard, I would say.
Right. What would be then, in your opinion, if farmers did this en masse over the next 6 months to a year? What would be the significance if they come to sell the land themselves? They're presumably now selling it without any jurisdiction. Presumably the next farmer, if they were so inclined, could say, "Oh no, I want to be under the hammer of this tyrannical government. I'll let the local authority." Again, if they didn't know, but presumably there would be no issue selling the land onward.
None whatsoever. Exactly as you just described. That's how it would be.
That is, I mean, this is groundbreaking, if I can use the pun. This
Yes.
is amazing, and it's been there all this time, just nobody knew.
Yes, and for new, without going into any of the details, because a lot of your viewers probably already know, and I'm sure you know yourself, they've done a lot of things to stop the remedies that I've created being, becoming widely used because they all work. They're all based upon a simple premise. We want them to apply the law as it was intended to be applied by Parliament and as legal precedents dictate it must. And they never do that unless it's in the interests of one of the private interests of the Crown. So, or Crown interests that all come under the one headline, if you want to generalize, it's all the House of Rothschild. The entire empire of ill-gotten gains is over 200 years old. It is crumbling before our eyes, even though they're making it look like they've given up whatever power they have. They haven't. They are trying to realign and they're trying to create a series of proxies to fool people. What I'm saying is, if we can get enough farmers in this country just to take up this simple remedy, we will take away the power of any of those forces to act upon our properties and
Well,
or rather upon the properties of the farms. And if we can stop them taking control of the food supply to basically to take absolute control of the people so they can dictate whatever because they're controlling the food as per Kissinger's plan from the 70s, control the food, you
yeah.
control everything. So to stop that happening, we absolutely, as a country, and this is why I wanted to lead with this issue, we absolutely, as a country and a world, we need to get behind our farmers because if there are no farms, there's no food. As we've all been saying, we need to keep repeating it until we've got a situation where the food in this country is back at the production level that it was in 1972 before the EU debacle started with the European Communities Act. In other words, we need to get back to at least 86% self-sufficiency rate, which is what we had then. That is one of the things that they set out to destroy. And the reason we were so self-sufficient is because we had such fantastic farms.
We definitely did, and I talk about this a fair bit on the channel about getting back to the small mixed farms rather than these great big monoculture farms servicing highly processed food, which is not ideal for the human condition. That is amazing. We've got more to talk about, which is very exciting, and I know that this will get passed around to the farmers. I've got a few contacts, which of course I shall immediately send this to because I can see these farmers getting back on the forms and filling out that AP1 box. I mean, it's not like you've got to go on a protest and get the tractors out and do anything. It's a very honourable and simple method, which
Yes.
I think for a farmer who would rather be on the land doing what he needs to do than having to organise and worry, am I doing the right thing? Will this protesting action affect me in a way with future contracts and things? They don't want that hassle. So this is amazing. So to tell us more then about the Universal Community Trust that you've set up and how that jurisdiction works, that ordinary everyday people can opt out of the acts and statutes, the jurisdiction that we're all in. We've been talking about this in many different aspects on the channel. So any enlightenment you can give us would be fantastic.
Okay, so the best place to start is not long after we established the jurisdiction on the summer solstice in 2012, when we ratified the international treaty, the Treaty of Universal Community Trust, creating everything. But we also created under international law, the legal right to operate in the way we were going to operate, i.e., to aim to pull off 12 objectives, and all of those objectives pretty much add up to dismantling the power of the criminal state over mankind and to right all of the wrongdoings that are being done by government policy. So, in other words, we set out to basically become the peaceful, all in one solution to all of the problems in the world, okay, that have been imposed upon us by government.
Yeah.
And we served the treaty upon the Queen, when she was still reigning, obviously. We served it upon the Treaty Office. We served it upon the Secretary of State for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, which is what you have to do. And we gave them 6 months, which you have to under the law of nations when new nations arise, because 26 new nations, independent of the state, arose in Britain on that day. And when that happens, other independent or sovereign nations who are notified of these matters, they have 6 months under international law to lodge any kind of legal objection. Otherwise, the nations are established as a matter of fact, and after 7 years, they're established as a matter of law if no objection that is valid comes forward. Now, we've been established, as I say, since 2012, so we're now in our 13th, we're coming up to our 13th year. It'll be the 12th anniversary pretty soon on the solstice. So we've already established ourselves as a matter of fact and a matter of law. We've already had negotiations with government departments. UCT passports were presented as an alternative to the state monopoly on passports.
Wow.
We presented the Borders Agency in autumn 2014 with our passport. And they asked us, because we complied with every single required international standard, we had them designed with high spec, and they were recognized by every computer system that they were tested on. Because of this, the Borders Agency asked us for 13 dummy copies of the UCT passport to integrate it within the UK system and the system that they operate throughout the rest of the world. In other words, the UCT passport was about to be up and running at the same as a workable passport worldwide. We were also negotiating with the DVLA. The DVLA had agreed to let me fill out. They let me make an application for diplomatic number plates, and those number plates were on the brink, or that application was on the brink of being accepted. So that these were major turning points. And right at that moment, in the autumn of 2014, when it looked like we were establishing exactly what we set out to within a very short period of just a couple of years, there was an attempt to assassinate me with poison. I was poisoned with a large amount of Shiga toxin producing E. coli bacteria on the very day when I acted as prosecutor in the first grand jury that had been formed in this country since the illegal suspension of grand juries in 1933 by statute. And on that very day, I was poisoned. Thankfully, I recovered, but that resulted in a hiatus for UCT. But behind the scenes, we were creating very quietly a new type of finance system, because we ascertained that for the powers to continue to exist that shouldn't be, for them to continue, they need to hold on to certain levers of power. And the
Mm.
greatest lever of power that our adversaries and enemies wield is absolutely the fake, fraudulent banking system that has the world in its grasp and has had for centuries. So, what we created within Universal Community Trust is a new type of financial system that is based upon credit, that is always backed by a financial instrument. The money is always backed by something. It's never backed by nothing. It's never created out of nothing either. And it's always spendable in cash as well as electronically. And we are on the brink right now, after a very long, slow development period. We are on the brink of setting up a fully operational and licensed bank called the UCT Treasury Bank, which is going to roll out this credit-based currency. It looks like before the end of the year. We're looking to do it as soon as we can. But all of the prototypes of the UCT currencies, electronic and otherwise, either have been made or are in the process of being made. We've got new sovereign indigenous nations all over the world who are coming forward wanting to either ratify the UCT treaty or wanting us to partner with them so they can emulate what UCT has already done in their nation. And what is absolutely becoming apparent, Richard, this year more than any other because of all the crap we've had to wade through the past few years, which thankfully has woken so many people, so many of the survivors have woken up because of the tyranny of the last and frauds of the last few years. And because of this, we are finding so many people, especially the most let's just say that the support that we're getting now from all quarters, but particularly many of the highest regarded activists during COVID have come forward and said, we didn't know that any of what you've created existed within the Universal Community Trust until recently. But what we have created is the all-in-one solution, the ultimate remedy to government tyranny is what we've created in Universal Community Trust. And it's not just the farmers' remedies that we have. We have a remedy for every single financial fraud. We have a remedy for the fraudulent council tax. We have basic administrative remedies which cost absolutely nothing except the postage to administer that will get rid of all the problems that you think you can't get rid of. And it doesn't mean that you won't have a fight. It doesn't mean that the state won't fight as hard as it can to hold on to its ill-gotten gains. But what it does mean is when people tell you you haven't got a choice, they're either lying or they're mistaken because now there is a choice. The choice is universal community trust. This is the advanced civilization that we are building alongside the corrupt Babylonian one, because eventually, when we get up and running, we're very quickly going to make it obsolete. The old system will become obsolete.
And hallelujah to that. I've been mentioning that that was my firm belief that the system is crumbling and it will disappear. And it's been interesting hearing people suggesting different mechanisms to do that, or not so much mechanisms to do that, but things to put into place for the future. And what you have been doing behind the scenes sounds amazing. How do people who obviously viewers of my channel, people who are fighting council tax or PNs, the parking things, the speed traps, and all of these things, the banks, the mortgages, the loans, and things. How do they find out more, and how soon can they get involved and be part of this?
Again, great question. The first thing to do is to go to universal-community-trust.org and just search in the menu for the UCT Treaty and the Memorandum of Understanding that we served upon Her Majesty's government, alerting them, letting them know what had been established by the treaty and the memorandum itself. Read those and probably read them or watch the videos because there are video versions so you can listen and read at the same time so you can gain a better understanding quicker. Once you have an understanding of what it is that we've created and what it is that we're opposed to and what it is we're attempting to bring about, which you will fully from reading those documents, then you should join via our mailing list at the same site. And again, the option to do that will be in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And you click on the link and it will basically give you it will give you the form that you need. And when you fill out the form and send it to the mailing list headquarters, you will get a reply as soon as someone is able to reply. And basically, we'll then send you a questionnaire, just a very simple questionnaire, just making sure that you are exactly the right type of person for UCT, because what we're looking for, Richard, is as many nation builders as possible. We're not looking for people who think that UCT is going to be a new version of the welfare state. It isn't. It's going to be the new civilization that we so desperately need for our children and grandchildren's futures to be secure. And for all these tyrannies that have abounded, that people still pretend aren't even going on, because there are so many of them. For all of them to stop, we need to build a new world. There is no other way, but this is the way forward. There is no doubt. Once you join our number, you'll get, as I say, contact, and we'll bring you into the fold. We'll find whichever community is nearest to you. And if it's near enough, you will be able to join that UCT community because we have sovereign UCT nations all over the country, as I said, in fact, all over the world now. And once you joined your own nation, or we'd also give you the option, if there wasn't one near you, we give you the option to found your own nation. But even if you're just one, let's give another farming example. Even if you're just one farmer who owns their land outright, we can assist you to turn the ownership of that property into a sovereign trust, which simply cannot be impeached as long as you do it correctly. And we provide, UCT provides all of the templates that actually work, not ones that people will sell you and pretend work that don't. And there are many of those around. We're talking about the templates that have been developed that have been ripped off so many times because they're the only ones that work. And we give them away for free. But we do this privately now because so many people have ripped us off. But what we're saying is that everybody who needs a remedy, the remedy will exist within the UCT remedy portfolio, and everybody who joins UCT has immediate access not just to the portfolio, but also to numerous mentors who never charge any money and always give advice based on their own direct experience of the same situations. In other words, Richard, what we've done within UCT, instead of setting up a more traditional learning facility, we've set up a system, a layered system of mentoring, where I mentor someone to do what I can do, and then they do the same with other people, and it just spreads exponentially. And sooner or later, you have lots of people mentoring lots of people to do things that there was only one person who could mentor people to do not so long ago. And that's the way we're spreading the word with this as fast as possible. So those are the first and initial things that they should do. And it will just getting in contact with us, just adding your name and email address to the mailing list will result in someone reaching out to you. Just be a bit patient because we do get a lot of inquiries, especially these days, given the fact that UCT is exploding worldwide the way it is.
That is amazing, and sounds absolutely fantastic. You mentioned earlier that you were poisoned, that you were attacked, and presumably the powers that shouldn't be are not very keen on what you've been doing and what you're doing. Are you seeing a lot of? I mean, I know that you're being censored and things like that, but are you seeing a lot of other types of nefarious activities to stop your message from getting out?
Yes, I can't talk about it in too much detail for legal reasons, but
Right.
5.5 months ago, the deep state took an attempt at not just destroying my life, but destroying me completely, and destroying my family. And they failed. They failed in every respect. And again, I can't go into details because I'm right in the middle of a legal action to actually put it right. But what I've done since then is I've achieved probably the greatest legal victory I've ever had. And I haven't announced it yet because I'm still bound not to speak about it legally. But what
Yep,
I have
sure.
achieved, Richard, despite everything, despite them trying to destroy everything I held dear, what I've managed to do is to make sure that everything that they were attempting to stop happening has proceeded as planned because our preparations have been such that we anticipated that they would literally do anything they could to stop me doing this. Because one of the things we haven't talked about, you mentioned the Great British Mortgage Swindle, which I urge anyone who's got a mortgage to watch the Great British Mortgage Swindle. You can see it on Amazon Prime. I'm sorry, they won't let us release it for free on Amazon Prime, otherwise it would be, it used to be. But you can also see it by going to the Great British Mortgage Swindle website. That's the greatbritishmortgageswindle.net. And then just search for the free version in the menu at the top of the page, and you'll be able to see the film that I'm referring to, which tells the story of litigants in person fighting on the front line in and out of court. The story of Michael O'Dara fight. He was the first one to stand up against mortgage fraud in this country, and we met and started working together then. And I ended up becoming the first lay litigant to successfully argue fraud against a British bank relating to mortgages in 2014. Now, that binding High Court precedent should have changed the way things are done with mortgages in this country, and it didn't. And the reason it didn't is because the entire edifice of financial fraud is dependent upon the continuation of the mortgage fraud. Now, if I just, because we're on this subject, and I think it's really important that people know this, there is no such thing as a mortgage or a bank loan in this country or anywhere else in most of the world that isn't fraudulent. In other words, every single loan is fraudulent. And I proved this in the High Court. We have a bundle of evidence from a class action that we put together to take down every single one of the 11.2 million fraudulent mortgages registered at the UK Land Registry. We put a class action together to have all of them cancelled in the same kind of way you make an alteration of the register on an AP1 form. And we were told by the Chief Land Registrar that even though all of the evidence that we were citing proved that the entire mortgage industry is fraudulent, 100%. Despite that, he said they weren't going to grant the cancellation of all of the charges as applied for because they didn't believe any judge would have the balls or the decency to order that.
God.
That's how corrupt this country is.
Yeah, and that is a reason to find a different way of looking after ourselves rather than remaining under the jurisdiction of
Correct.
this tyrannical government.
Exactly right.
You must have faced, and clearly you have, as you've expressed to me here, a lot of battles, some in which there are things that must have at times seem almost insurmountable. What kind of person are you? I mean, the reason I ask that is that many people who haven't faced the sort of things that you faced might be receiving a liability order from the council tax, or they may have the knock at the door from the bailiffs, which instigates fear because they may never have faced this before, but we've been seeing this on the increase more and more, and especially vulnerable people, old people, people perhaps one-parent families with two kids and what have you, and they are at their wits' end. Somebody sent me an email only the other day saying that a friend of theirs had had the liability order and committed suicide, which is an absolute tragic thing, particularly as it was fraudulent to begin with. So the reason I'm asking you must have seen these situations, but what keeps you going, knowing that you have to keep fighting?
Again, that's a great question. And it is a very difficult situation when, and don't get me wrong, this started for me, and this is the best way to explain how it came about that I became as resilient as I am. This started for me back when I was 18, because I had a bird's eye view of exactly how corrupt the world was going to become, because it was already happening back in the 80s and the 70s, but not at the level it is now. My family were evicted from the family home when I was 18 on the last day of my A levels, and I had to oversee the eviction because my mother was having a nervous breakdown, and my dad took her and my sister and my grandma away, and I had to deal with it all. And at the end of the day, I was waiting for my granddad to come and pick me up. I was standing on the lawn outside the house where I'd spent my formative years from 10 till 18. I had the time of my life, great, the best years of my life they were. And so I was very, very upset about this, but, holding it together because I had to. And the official receiver who had framed my dad, because the house was actually in the name at the land registry of my granddad, and they had pretended that it was in my dad's name and the land registry was wrong, that it was a mistake, and that was an absolute lie, in order to bankrupt my dad and take the house, because the house was, my dad renovated a derelict Norman Peel tower that he bought for a song 8 years or 10 years previously, and by the time he'd finished renovating it, it was worth at least 1 million, and they nicked it and they sold it to one of their friends for 70 grand, and it was worth, as I say, over 1 million at the time. And the guy who did this, the guy who was responsible for it, pulled up in an E-type Jag, and he wound his electric window down, which were newfangled at the time, because I was standing on the
Yeah.
grass. I'm standing there in my school uniform, and he says to me, "Tell your dad if he's in there to get all his possessions and yours and the rest of your family's out of that house by 6:30. Otherwise, it's going to be binned or incinerated. It's not worth anything to sell." And I looked at him And I said, "Are you finished?" And he said, "Yes. Why?" I said, "Because if you don't get out of here by the time I count to 10, I'm not going to be responsible for my actions." And I got to three, and he went and said, "Just tell your dad," sneering out the window and sped away. And at that point, I swore, Richard, to find out, because I didn't know enough about what the crimes that were committed against my family were. But I swore that no matter what would happen in the course of my life, if ever there was a chance that my family were going to have their home stolen again, I would do whatever it takes to stop them. And TGBMS tells the story of me saving my parents and my sister's house from the violent theft that the other protagonists in TGBMS and the Great British Mortgage Swindle that they suffered. The Tom Crawford and his family, Mike Lodera and the Albert family, they all lost their houses on the same argument that I won and saved my parents and sisters on. So that, again, when I got to the point where I realized I can't even go into the system and create a verdict that will change things for all the people that can't argue it themselves.
Mm.
So I suddenly saw that if I show a way to beat every single one of the things that make people feel suicidal, if I aimed to create a system that would just get rid of the ability for tyrants to run things like this, then those days would end for everybody. And the only thing, and I mean it, the only thing that has kept me going during the darkest days when at the beginning I was like everybody else. I didn't want to go and see what the brown envelopes contained on the mat every morning because I hadn't been through the experiences that I've been through, knowing that once you liberate yourself of the fear of these people, they lose most of their power over you. And once you realize what the lie that they're peddling is, you gain power over them to stop them coming after you. So I decided that I would just continue doing what I do long enough for enough people to emulate me and come to the same conclusion. And that is, we have no choice but to keep going, Richard, for the sake of all our children and grandchildren. That is the only defining characteristic of what keeps me going. I cannot live in a world like this where my daughter and everyone else's children is growing up. I can't. I cannot live knowing that the world, survivor of Gen X, I don't know which generation you are, but perhaps you're the same. But I can't live in this world knowing that the flawed world that I grew up in is much better than this one. The freedom that children enjoyed during the 70s is
Mm.
now impossible in the current climate. And they don't want it to be possible. They want children to be scared of going out. They want adults to be scared of going out because they want to keep us in their 15-minute neighborhoods, don't they? And all the rest of it. And we're not going to let it happen. And the way we're not going to let it happen is simply by saying, this is wrong, and we're not going to accept it no matter what they do. And it's the only way to win, to never back down, to stand your ground on the facts and the law, but the real law, not the bullshit statute law that they rely upon, natural law, or otherwise known as the common law. That's how I get through it.
And that is a very, very powerful message that you have just delivered. I was just thinking as you were saying that most of the people that I have on the channel come from obviously not the same background and such, but they come from that sort of emotive point of view. They're there to do stuff for other people, which you see so lacking in the system, the government, your MPs, the bankers, and the corporate Britain that we have seen built up around us. That there is no humanity anymore, and what you've just said there emotes huge amounts of humanity. And the fact that you've principally, it sounds as if you've been effectively working with all the stuff that you've been doing for free for the greater good, speaks volumes, I know, to me and to the audience. But I totally agree with you. This is what we do, and why each and every one of us do what we can. And some people can achieve greater things, and other people are just waiting in the wings to use those skills and talents that they have. And I feel that actually what you've been talking about with the Universal Community Trust is that there will be huge opportunity for those people who have those skills to flourish within it and to help others and bring it forward.
Exactly. Again, you hit the nail on the head that we want people, everybody, to give up working and slave or slaving just to have a meager existence or even a miserable existence, which most people have these days. Most people do whatever they do as a job for the money to pay the bills because they don't think they have a choice. It didn't used to be this way. There were many, many people, especially working class people, who had trades that are still useful to this day, trades that will always be useful. So UCT is saying what we want is we don't just want the skilled people to come back and ply their trades. We want people to do what actually sings in their hearts with their
Right.
lives. We
Yeah.
want that to be their vocation. We want self-realization to be the aim of every child, to understand what it is that drives them. Why did they incarnate during these times? What is it that they came to do? We don't want to suppress their creativity and make them live in fear, and that if they don't obey whoever the purported authority figure is, then they'll be in trouble and life's just easier if you go along to get along. It isn't. It gets much harder and it never ends. The misery never ends. There is no life without freedom. And this is what I want so much the younger generations, because the older generations from Gen X upwards, they still know what freedom was.
Mm.
The youngsters don't. They don't know what it was like to walk down the street in this country and feel free and safe. And that no matter what you did, as long as you didn't break the law, no one was going to mess with you.
Yeah.
It's all
No.
gone, and we can bring it back, and that's what we're doing. We're bringing it back. It needs to come back.
We'll wrap it up in a second, but I just wanted to say that in my talks that I've been subsequently asked to do as a result of running this channel, one of the things I have been saying is that our generation, because when I go and do the talks, they're all sort of people over 50, and I'm 60 myself, so I remember the sort of the 60s and the 70s, and that was my era. And you're absolutely right, what you paint there, the freedom that we had, the ability just to roam and have not the worry of, and the worst that would happen is a policeman might sort of give you a clout round the ear because you had a lot of respect for your elders and things, and we were brought up with that. But one of the things that I do say to the audience as I see them, this room full of 50 plus, is that as and when the others begin to become aware of the great harms that have been put on them, we will be the signposts, because we still have that one leg in the analog world, in the world of freedom, and we can see with the other leg in the digital world of ever increasing prisons and enclosures around us, and the traps that have been laid. We, I think, will be the ones that will help the people, because we have had that unique experience. As you say, the young people who've been brought up with the screens, with the school system, with the asking permission for everything they do, including biological functions to empty their bladder. To be able to sort of give them that sense of how to go about it is a huge role that we should be playing.
Yes, I completely agree. Again, it's I think it's our duty, Richard, as people who remember what it was like during those times, that how much better it would be if just we brought back certain elements which we're able to do. And one of the things that will give, I think that people have lost pride in themselves. One of the things that
Absolutely.
will give pride back to people in communities is bringing back the working class communities, and that's what UCT is attempting to do. Where people have commented in the past that one of the things that we're doing is we're attempting to reform the clans. It's another way of saying trying to reform the working class communities that were smashed to oblivion by the state as late as the 80s. I still remember. I saw it live myself. I'm sure you remember it well.
Mm.
How they decimated every working class community in this country by just destroying The mining industry, the shipbuilding industry, the steel industry, everything that made this country proud in terms of the working class was just taken away from them. So they never had any pride in themselves anymore, to demoralize the working classes and make the ones who were foolish enough to think that they could be something else, this thing, middle class. But the middle class is nothing but it's just a poor man's version of the working class because they're all slaving for a living and blindly obeying the rules, not questioning things, why we have to do things differently, and forming the communities from the ground up to make sure that these communities can't be controlled because they're formed from the ground up from the start. And the way we run things, Richard, is so tight that literally, unless you can prove that you're an honest man or woman, we won't work with you. And it's funny, lots of people don't like being asked to prove that they're trustworthy. We see that as a badge of honor. We have a 2-year period where new trustees, they will not compete with each other, but they will spur each other on to have their probationary period in the first 2 years, a period where they achieve more than any other previous probationary trustee has. And we do this while they're being mentored by all of the most experienced trustees in whatever they want to do. Is this not just a version of the way the old apprenticeship system used to work? Because we're teaching people to teach others the remedies that we've been talking about today, among many other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's nothing wrong with the old apprenticeships. I mean, going right back, perhaps not the kids going up the chimneys. We could avoid that, of course. But Michael, it's been an absolute joy to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on and telling us. I mean, firstly, the jaw-dropping AP1 form for farmers. I think that's something that farmers can be getting on with immediately. And then other people, of course, can be looking at the wider issue of the Universal Community Trust and explore your website and get in touch. Be patient, as you so rightly said, for a response. We've all become incredibly impatient, and everything's so convenient these days. We've lost that responsibility for ourselves. So hopefully people can do all of that. But I appreciate coming on and telling us all about your work and what you've been doing. It's been absolutely fantastic.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for inviting me. It has been a pleasure, and I've very much enjoyed talking to everybody.
So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely fantastic, very enlightening, and gives us all hope, which is at this moment, as we go through the 2024, I think as we start to see some very strange things happening, we want to hang on to that hope and explore all these avenues. My biggest thanks to Michael there for coming on to the show. Do check out the University Community Trust. The link will be in the description, of course. I'll be back with more monologues and wonderful guests. But until then, from Michael and myself, thank you so much for watching. Till next time, goodbye.